And now it's time for questions from you. We've got about 15 minutes. There's a mic over there, and I've got a mic in my hand over here. So put your hands up, and you know well, 5 people up on stage know everything there is to know about marine science. So you can hit them with anything, absolutely anything. I'm going to volunteer someone in a minute. Ah, there we are. Right in the middle, of course. let me squeeze through here. No, might just jump over, and here we are. Oh, you've got it. Okay.
Thank you. Just 2 quick questions, if I may. One to Dr. Luff. I noticed on your image of the El Nino event, the heating of the ocean, there, you had a photograph. One of them showed that the northern eastern Pacific seemed to be hotter than the 1997 El Nino year. Is that a significant issue for us, that not just the equatorial Pacific coming back, but also the northeastern Pacific off the California coast sort of thing? And I'll just ask the second one as well.
No, answer that one first, then you can do the other one. Try the mic, under your chin.
Okay, I won't remember the second question, but it's interesting that hotspot in the northeastern Pacific. Hawaii has been having very bad coral bleaching, has been affected by that in recent months. Whether that particular pattern is part of the El Nino event or whether it's just an extraneous sort of hot blob that's developed there is probably a moot point. But the main problem is just the fact that it's highly likely that water temperatures off the east coast of Australia are going to be unusually warm at the time of the normal seasonal maximum temperatures.
Second part?
The second question actually is to Dr. Morrison. A friend of mine who has worked at the GBR Authority said to me the other day that the southern half of the Great Barrier Reef is lost. Would you like to comment?
The governance of the southern half of the reef is lost, or has been lost. A few people, I've presented this talk before, and a few people have come up to me afterwards and said, why are you bothering? We know it's going to die anyway. I don't feel that way. I think, there's time to turn things around. I think systems and human and ecological systems are more resilient than we think, but we need to help them along the way. There might be some other who might like to comment. No?
Next question. Make it on this side. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question maybe for Dr. Morrison first, but maybe to anyone on the panel as well. So at the end of this year, there's a very big conference in Paris, COP21, right? The UNFCCC Conference on Climate Change. And do you know if there will be much discussion there of coral reefs and potentially even the Great Barrier Reef at the conference?
I don't know personally, but I hope that there will be. I know of a number of people going to that conference, and I assume that they're going to talk about the reef, as well as a lot of other environmental issues that pertain to climate change. So I'm sure it will probably be on the agenda.
I don't know whether you know, but Hugh Gilberg from the University of Queensland is in Paris today. And if I know Ove, he's stirring it up, and it will happen.
I think he is going to that meeting too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's preparing the ground. There's no way they're going to ignore the reefs. On the west side of Australia as well, plenty of them. Next. You're pointing here? Okay. Oh, you just want to look at the microphone. It's a nice microphone.
I'll stand up and I'll use the microphone. Yes, this is to anybody who wants to answer this. Given that we've got ocean acidification and heating, which is probably going to drive that acidification even further, what sort of timeframes do you think we have to reverse things? What sort of lag have we got, socially, politically as well as scientifically?
very short time frame. We might even have exceeded it. Yeah, I mean, got beyond that. Even if we stopped everything now, all the nasty stuff that we're doing to the atmosphere and the oceans, there is such a lag in the system that we are still going to be seeing effects for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that is if we just stop things now. I don't want to be that pessimistic, but it is pessimistic when you look at it from that point of view.
David, do you want to comment on that? You can't escape.
Oh, I'd like to say no, but I don't think that's an option, is it? For me, I think the biggest problem is despondency. Was it Winston Churchill was saying that you've got to be an optimist because if you're a pessimist, you've already lost. So I think we have to fight. And for me, the 400 million years of evolution, I think that lays a good foundation. So I'm fairly confident the system does have the capacity to recover. What we're going to do is we're going to foul our own nest. We're going to have problems in the near future for ourselves. So I've got a lot of confidence in the system. It's just whether or not we can make decisions fast enough for ourselves. I know it's self-centered, but that's why I think we have to take action quickly for our own well-being.
Any other comments on that? Which is the big question, of course, facing everybody.
So to comment on the socio-political aspects of that question, I think it's easy to dismantle environmental policy, and the Queensland government, the new Queensland government, is now finding it's really hard to reinstate policy. So to give you an example, the Coastal Planning Act was repealed and state-of-the-art coastal plans revoked under the previous government, and the new government has promised to reinstate those, but this new government is finding it much harder to reinstate them than they had anticipated. So we need to stop the dismantling now and start rebuilding, because there's going to be a lag effect for those policies, reinstated policies, to be implemented.
Tiffany, are you getting the impression that public opinion is race ahead of the politicians? I feel that.
Well, I think the activities of the last few weeks might say that the politicians are starting to catch up with public opinion.
I mean, not just in Australia. Jodie, you're nodding?
Oh, I agree. I think education and a lot more public outreach is really the key. I was thinking from a biological perspective, a piece of information about warming oceans and how we know from a lot of the studies in my group and in lots of my colleagues' groups as well, just 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperatures will decrease performance of many, many species of fish. And the most common response I would get from many members of the general public would be like, well, the fish will just move to a cooler spot. And that's not always an option, and largely that's not an option, especially for coral reef fishes that we do a lot of studying with. And so I think the why that's associated with that, and I think a lot more scenarios like this where we're bridging the public with the science and having these types of discussion, I think fills those gaps a little bit more and gives answers to those questions that the public tends to have, and we owe it to the public to give them that information as well. So I think by and large, that's what's happening, is there's a lot more connection with the information. I think that's what'll help.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Hi, this is actually a question for Mike. So with the work that you presented, there's obviously at some point the scientists and the environmentalists said shark finning is bad, and then there was a lag between sort of, public opinion catching up and governments catching up. But you sort of showed that actually you can go from things that maybe seemed almost hopeless to actually getting people to really change their habits. What sort of advice would you give to public about the ability to do that with climate change?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a really good example of, as you said, something that might be considered really difficult in a non-democratic society like China, where the activities of civil society and the broader public did play a significant role. And so, one of the main reasons why the government decided to ban shark fin soup in banquets in the end was particularly to respond to public opinion and to not be seen as the bad guys in the room, so to speak. So I agree. I mean, I think it's a good example of what can potentially be done in a situation that may look hopeless from the start or something.
Could I give an example on that? Over in the West, do you remember the West? We've got a big reef there. The Abrolhos Islands, a study was done by, in fact, a PhD student from Curtin University, and she was interested in the views of the fishers who spent, say, 3 or 4 months a year living on the Abrolhos Islands and catching crayfish and so on. And most of them, fishers, were not interested in climate change, thought it was all bullshit. But she said, could we do an experiment? Would you mind noting what you may have seen change? And would you take pictures? Would you do photographs of some of these changes? And we'll have an exhibition in Geraldton and a couple of other places of what you've noticed. And the fishers were quite excited by this. They knew the islands, they knew their place, and they knew that the catch had dropped by 50% in recent times. They were wondering why. And so when the photographs were taken, there was an exhibition, and the scientists added to the observations of these ordinary people who were just used to earning a living. And the synergy was quite extraordinary. And through that exercise of these people who are otherwise cynical, seeing their place being looked at thoughtfully, their attitudes changed completely. So instead of saying global this or global that, which is beyond an ordinary person's control, my control, anyone's control in this room, you then took a different line. And you made a public impact because the exhibition became famous, and we put it on the radio, went around the world. And those sort of exercises are changing the way people look at things like climate change, which becomes your problem where you are. And the people who make wine for us, thank you for leaving the reception upstairs. But the vineyards, a couple of them that used to be in Victoria, moved to Tasmania because the climate changed. Round the world, lots of people are working in a different way, and they're realizing the change because it's happening. So you can connect with people like that. And once that becomes a reality, it stops being a kind of vague worldwide thing like wars and becomes your problem. I think that'll make a difference. Do you want to add to that question at all? Talking about food and reactions to climate change at all? David? Always David. One last question.
What have I done?
One last point over there. Yes, please. Here comes the mic.
I know you're mainly dealing with sort of Queensland corals, and reefs, I should say. Can you suggest to me, are there any studies of whether the artificial, how they put boats down for people to dive, and we find it becomes a centre for fish and other animals to be in. We've got one down at Tinderbox just south here, and a diver just recently in Red Map, which is our version of what you're talking about, has just been sort of blown away by the amount of sea life he found in that area around the artificial setup. And I'm wondering if that can help the situation you're talking about. The other thing I always wonder is there any sign that the coral, because the warming has been happening now for quite a number of years, is there any sign that the corals have started to move south at all? Or is that something that takes thousands of years, therefore it wouldn't happen?
Janice.
Yeah, lots of good questions there. People have been finding coral species south of the Great Barrier Reef in recent years. The other point, though, is that the Great Barrier Reef's not going to move south. there will be individual coral species and associated organisms and fish that can take advantage of conditions further south. So the ecosystem is not going to move. There will just be, some organisms that will do that. I'm not really qualified to sort of talk about whether you can put a whole range of shipwrecks off the end of the Great Barrier Reef and help things, because one of the other stalling blocks is the fact of you haven't got, the water's not shallow enough for the coral reef ecosystems once you get a bit further south. So there's a lot of things happening there, but I think given the criticalness of the situation, it's worth exploring every possibility that you can in order to save the ecosystems.
I know there have been some studies, maybe in some of the Caribbean systems, where artificial reefs have been placed in certain areas for tourism to take the pressure off of the natural reefs. And so, that could be an option that's explored a little bit more, not to substitute, but just to take the pressure away from the natural reefs to give them that reprieve to heal a bit more. But I think if enough research is done and if the education is out there that it's not meant to fix the problem, it's meant to supplement, then they could be interesting and probably positive solutions. Yeah.
Final point? Go on, Tiffany. Say something.
You made a comment before about winemakers starting to talk about climate change and acknowledge climate change. Well, I've seen a change in my lifetime from when I was an environmental science undergraduate in my 20s to now nearly 40. In my 20s, I come from a very large cattle farming family, which farms all through central Queensland, and the decision to do an environmental science degree didn't go down very well in that family when I was in my 20s. In fact, I spent my entire 20s trying to hide from my family. But now, in the stage of my life I am now, I socialise with them all the time, and all they want to talk about is climate change. They're very interested in the topic. They understand it. They understand the impact on their farms.
That's so significant.
And they want to know how to manage it.
Yep. That's why things are going to change dramatically in the next few years. People have got the information, and now they've got the impact where they live and where they work around the world. It's going to make a huge difference. Final point, I once played truant at school. I happened to be in Vienna. I think I must have been about 8. And the trouble with playing truant when you run away from school is, what do you do then? You can't just go home because your parents will find out you're not at school. So I went to the Urania cinema. Must have been about 1954. Do you remember 1954? You probably don't. And the only film on was by someone called, 2 people, Hans and Lottie Huss. They'd made films under the Red Sea. And that's the first time most of us in the world had seen underwater. So in one small lifetime, and I'm still going, in my lifetime, people began to see what you marine scientists are seeing as a matter of routine. And so it's not really made a full impact yet. And now that we're getting more and more sophisticated, showing what life is like underwater, and what corals are doing, what reefs are, and the complexity of all these different animals, the fish evolving and doing all those amazing things. I reckon that general knowledge about what nature is really doing and the incredible value of it, the treasure trove that we have inherited instead of, the 5-second investment in coal and minerals. My father was a coal miner, so I'm not against coal, obviously, but it's going to change dramatically along with the other things we've talked about. Would you please thank the panel? And thank you, Terry Hughes and the Centre for Excellence, and thank you for coming in. Most of you are marine scientists, but there are some members of the public, so thanks for coming in tonight. Thank you.